Hello and thank you for joining us on Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines in the week. I am Jacinta Ubiuku. This week, the presidential flag bearer of the All Progressives Congress, APC, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, presented his action plan and manifesto to captains of industry and other key players in the private sector. At the meeting, Tinubu promised to revive dead industries in the country if elected president in 2023. Also, the Academic Staff Union of Universities ASUU has condemned the payment of half salary for the month of October to lecturers. ASUU President Professor Emmanuel Osadeke said the union will summon a National Executive Committee (NEC) meeting over the matter. Later on the show, we will look at the impact assessment of flood in Nigeria, as well as State Governor Doyodiri harps on the need for more partnership between state and federal governments and finding lasting solution to perennial flooding across the country. Details in a moment. Stay with us. Now let's begin with politics, where the presidential flag bearer of the All Progressive Congress, APC, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, presented his action plan and manifesto to captains of industry and other key players in the private sector. During the presentation, Tinubu promised that his administration will revive Nigeria's moribund industries if elected president in 2023. TVC News business editor Tolulope Ogunjobi reports.
The business community was fully represented with the president of Dangote Group, Mr. Aliko Dangote, Mr. Jimovia, chairman Zenith Bank, chairman Harris Holding, Mr. Tony Elumelu, former chief executive of Access Bank, Mr. Herbert Wigwe, and other leaders representing sectoral groups operating in the country. Political associates, party leaders, state governors, former and serving senators and lawmakers, senior officers of the campaign council were also in attendance. The APC presidential candidate, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, laid out his action plan before the business leaders and solicited for their support. He believes that a viable economy requires collaboration between political and business leaders.
We must target, and we will, I assure you, target growth. At very least, we must achieve GDP growth of minimum 6%, if not 10% per annum. Promote agriculture. We shall continue to press reforms in the sector that will increase productivity, improve farm incomes while lowering food prices, and bring enough food to the table of ordinary people.
For the vice presidential candidate of the party, the APC team is ready to revive dead industries, promote agriculture, provide power, produce and use made in Nigerian goods, build infrastructure, and most importantly, improve the country's security situation.
That insecurity is a major deterrent of private enterprises and investments, not to talk of the trade to life and livelihoods. That is why we plan to adopt a proactive and intelligence-driven approach to addressing the nation's security challenges. These will include bolstering security forces in numbers, training, equipment, salaries, and welfare.
The event also featured a panel session largely made up of young Nigerians who brought their minds intelligently on the developmental plan of the APC, which according to them is highly achievable.
Well, joining me in the studio for more discussion on this issue is a journalist, Mayowa Oladeji. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, you're welcome.
As well, I have a political analyst, Ayodele Adio, joining us via Zoom. Thank you for joining us. Ayodele, are you there? All right, let me begin with you. So what do you make of this Okay, let's even look at the manifesto. The major point there is the idea of, or the intention to grow the GDP by double digit to reduce poverty. What's your thought on that?
I'm looking at the manifesto of the APC presidential candidate, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Very good theoretically, but we all know how translating theories to practical work in this system. So there are a lot of things that need to be put in place. Security for one. We all know how everything is, even if there is the requisite infrastructure to make things work. I mean, well, infrastructure is very important, but we need security. I mean, we can't go out without being in fear, being out of, okay, when will I get back home? Or so those things have to be in place. Value for human life has to be in place. I mean, we all have to have a sense of belonging, a sense of patriotism in the country for anything to even work. Then we all need to ensure there are consequences for actions, because I think that's the major key in ensuring a country attain its potential. Insofar bad people get away with crime, you see, the thing cascades towards the lower rank. We'll be like, okay, insofar I can get away with this. Those are part of the things that are holding us back. I mean, you can point to this devaluation of Naira, the way the Naira is spiraling. We all have people that buy from the bank and, we sell and all, and still blame the government. So all of us, we have our part to play towards ensuring that anybody that becomes the president, whether it's Asiwaju, whether it's Peter Obi or Tinubu, if you look at the manifestos, on paper, everything is right. I've read articles I read tidbits of Asiwaju's on, even Peter Obi with all his thoughts and all. So in theory, everything is good. But to go the GDP, all has to be on deck, both from the private sector and the public sector. So.
All right, also still talking about this manifesto tagged hope for, renewed hope for 2023, action plan for a better Nigeria. Do you see any link between the 1993 manifesto with this one, like many have argued?
People just talk for the sake of talking, and I don't want to seem like an apologist, like an Asiwaju apologist, but there are no new ideas. We all know that. Even in arts and literature, there are no new ideas. So I don't see the furore over, even if it's copied. I don't think it's copied anyway, but even if it's copied, there's no big deal in it. What we all want as Nigerians is for the country to work. And if that manifesto is what will make the country work, I'm all for it. I mean, we just like minoring in the major and majoring in the minor. So we all just have to support whoever becomes the president. Everybody should sheathe their swords, even if you are on the losing side, and just try to make the country work. That's the most important thing right now.
All right. Also, with regards to the idea of Tinubu's Shettima plans in terms of deliverables, what do you think on that?
Tinubu Shettima, from what I've seen, we have to look at the antecedents. Even though people will say, okay, you can't go into the battle based on your antecedents, but I think that's fallacious. I mean, you have to look at the antecedents of Asiwaju, what he's done for Lagos, even though we know he could do better. I mean, that's what we can work with anyway. Even when you look at articles, you look at Peter Obi, those are the things those are the variables we can work with. And based on his antecedents, I think, because one, he said in that speech that he's going to remove subsidy. That's like a major way out, because the country is in debt. We have to remove the subsidy. Whether it's going to be in phases or he has to obliterate it completely, it has to be done. So step by step, incremental. And I like the fact that he invited captains of industry, Alhaji Aliko Dangote and all. So those are the people that will work together to make his administration work. So I think they're on point.
Okay, I think we now have our Zoom guest, Ayodele Adio. Are you there?
Hello.
All right. So let me come to you. How would you regard the Tinubu Shettima plans in terms of deliverables? Are you there, Ayodele?
Network. I think network.
Okay, so another thing Tinubu mentioned in the manifesto is the issue of insecurity. With the plan, with the plan listed out, what can you also drive from that, or what sense can you make of the whole plan mapped out for how to tackle the insecurity?
The problem with the mainstream media, I feel we all have the responsibility to foster a sense of belonging and a sense of safety amongst Nigerians. We all know the current war against terrorism and banditry has been largely successful to some large extent. I mean, in the past couple of weeks, we've seen our troops decimating them, swaths of territory. Iteto has been dominated by these bandits. You see our troops dying daily, and now you come online, you now see people trying to like denigrate their effort. I don't think that's the way to go. We know they can do better, more can still be done, but I believe if whether it's Asiwaju that enters, I need to reiterate this point, whether it's Asiwaju, but since we're focusing on Asiwaju, I think it will continue because it's an APC, government is a continuum. So I believe it will continue from where President Buhari stops regarding insecurity, and I think it will be successful with it to create a very better economy here. You live in Lagos?
Mr. Ayodele. Mr. Ayodele, are you there? Can you hear me? Mr. Ayodele, can you hear me? Welcome back, and it's still Newsweek, where we discuss the biggest stories that made the headlines in the week. Away from politics now, the federal government has explained why it failed to pay full salary to lecturers under the aegis of the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU. In a statement by the Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment, government noted that members of ASUU were paid their October salary on a pro rata basis and not half salary. According to the ministry, pro rata was done for the lecturers because they cannot be paid for work not done. The statement further clarified that the Minister of Labour and Employment, Chris Ngige, never directed the Accountant General of the Federation to pay the university lecturers half salary. Okay, so let me even... What would you say the idea of some getting full salary and some not getting?
What are the some that didn't get their full salary? Because earlier, the unverified reports that Konwa, the splitter faction, some of them got their full salary, so I don't know whether that's what you're alluding to. But from the point of the federal government, the Federal Minister of Labour, Senator Chris Ngige, said lecturers, based on pro rata, they can't pay them more than what they were. Then there's this disharmony. The ministry said they didn't direct the Accountant General to pay them half salary. So I don't know what's going on. But if we want to look at it, technically, the federal government is right. Definitely, you can't pay, even if you own a business, you can't pay for work not done. But because of the whole crisis, students being at home for close to a year now, yesterday, day before yesterday, the ASUU chapter of UniJaws and a couple of universities, they down tools. Then reports on Twitter, so I was on Twitter, some students were complaining that the lecturers came to the class, down tools, just walked out, like they were lamenting that half salary and all. I just think the government should have extended goodwill by paying them full salary. Albeit, because sometimes, even though we've all worked in companies whereby we started work half of the month and we paid full, it's just like goodwill, buying their goodwill, because we all know it was the court that mandated ASUU tourism. It's not like there was any pre-agreement between them two regarding the salary, but it's just something that needs to be done to buy the goodwill while negotiations are ongoing. That's what I feel about that.
All right, let me come to you again, Mr. Ayodele. Are you there? Can you hear me? I think we're still having issues with the network. So you seem not to have issues with the idea that some are not paid their full salary, but whether you like it or not, the members are lamenting. What do you think could be the implication of this whole thing in university system?
The implication over the years, the implication is there. It's obvious for us to say our educational system is moribund. I mean, for a 4-year course, you see students spending 7 or 8 years. So the thing is, both the federal government and ASUU, they both have their faults. There are a lot of misgivings, a lot of distrust on both sides. That's why all stakeholders, all hands has to be on deck for this issue to be resolved. Because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, as I reiterated, it's always the students that suffer for it. So I said, negotiation has to be going on. Like, okay, what are you going to do? We're paid half salary. Are you going to sue? Are you going to appeal to the federal government? Because downing tools, you can't down tools at this moment in time. We've already lost 1 year, one academic year. Some universities are already scrapped the 2021, 2022 session. Some universities scrapped it. They're going to start afresh. Do you know the implication of that? And the intake, you have new jam by new fresher. So some are going to be at home for 2 years. So all stakeholders, even parents, all of us has to be on deck just to resolve this situation, because it's a very sorry situation for students and for the educational system.
All right, what do you also suggest should be done to avoid further industrial dispute in the system?
On the part of the federal government, are there to agreements. The ASUU is not the only body the federal government has shook on pre-signed agreements. You see the federal government backing out of agreements. We have the electricity workers, and we all know the case 2 months ago whereby the national grid was shut down because of pre-agreements signed and the federal government failing to adhere to their part. So that's what the federal government is. The federal government, they are like the body, so they have to adhere to that's what ASUU has always been reiterating. The federal government refuses to adhere to the agreement, so the bulk of the whole thing sits with it. Because the ASUU themselves, they have kids. Some of them have kids. They are not happy. They are not happy. So the federal government has a lot to do regarding just adhering to agreements. That's the whole way. That's the first step towards redressing and ensuring there's trust and bonding among stakeholders.
Mr. Ayodele, I'm trying to know if you're there now. Hello, Mr. Ayodele. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you clearly. I can't hear you clearly.
But I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you faintly.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Okay, so what do you make of this idea of some lecturers being paid full salary while others not?
I'm not sure that there is any lecturer that was paid in full. The reports that I have gathered and the complaints that we have seen carried by credible news sources is that many of these lecturers have been, paid perhaps half a month's salary. And if you listen to what the Minister of Labor has said, his argument was that the federal government couldn't be held liable for that because, ASUU hadn't worked for 8 months and by that extension do not deserve to be paid in that 8 months, right? So first, I'm not sure that anybody has received salaries in full. Second, I think is a bit embarrassing because schools have been on strike for 8 months. I would have expected that one of the negotiations was that salaries were going to be paid in full while lecturers were going to resume. Now, what this is going to lead to is another breakdown in the wagon of our educational cycle again, because there's an emergency meeting that's going to be held tomorrow by ASUU And I can argue that the outcome of that meeting is that they are going to proceed on another strike if the federal government does not pay them their salaries in full. Now, that for me, again, is treating the issue of education with levity, and is taking the lives of several hundreds of thousands of students for granted. And it makes absolute no sense to me that we want to bring ourselves back in a situation in the hole that we've been for 8 months, because people want to put their egos on the line. I think that it's important for us to come to the middle and resolve these issues amicably. And one of the ways not to resolve this issue and to prolong this impasse is for the federal government to refuse to pay ASUU for 8 months and continue to hold on to the debate or the argument that they didn't work for 8 months and hence do not deserve pay. That is just going to prolong this crisis, and the students are just going to be at the receiving end of it.
Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. But let's move to our final story for tonight. The Bayelsa state government has faulted the claim by the federal government that the state is not one of the top 10 states affected by the recent flooding recorded in many parts of Nigeria. The Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, Sadiya Umar Farouk, said Jigawa is the most affected state and that Bayelsa is not in the top 10. In an interview, Bayelsa State Governor Doyodiri speaks on the need to find lasting solutions to the perennial flooding across the country. Here is his reaction.
The magnitude of flooding in my state is even beyond only the ecological funds. Yes, as our own contribution, if that is going to save my state, we'll be happy to let go the ecological funds that are coming to my state. But I believe that the magnitude is beyond only ecological funds. And the federal government and the state government will have to sit together to see how much more the federal government can contribute to the state governments, and then who and what companies will be able to handle the solution, a permanent solution. I wouldn't want to preempt what the post-flood management committee, which is headed by my deputy governor, will come up with. You have seen the level of damage to not only state facilities, even to federal government facilities. The other day, the chief of air staff was here, and the whole of their place was equally flooded, So it will be colossal sums of money. I cannot sit here to predict how much that will be, it will be gulping.
All right, Ayodele, let me come to you quickly. Bayelsa State claims that the data used by the federal government to arrive at that conclusion is erroneous. What do you think?
I didn't hear your question clearly, but I think you were asking what my take was about the Delta State government's position on how the government has handled the flooding. To be honest, I think there's enough blame to go around, because first, the arguments being made by some of the governors of the most affected states is that the ecological fund that they've been receiving over the years couldn't have been enough, to mitigate the tragedy that has befell these states. To some extent, that argument might hold water, given the catastrophe that we've seen in the last weeks with the floods that have happened most recently. However, it would seem to me that many of these states that have been vulnerable over the years haven't invested adequately or haven't used their ecological funding judiciously to be able to, at the barest minimum, mitigate some of these challenges in a way and manner that they will not be totally reliant on the federal government. And on the part of the federal government, it will seem to me that the federal government has not muscled enough resources or treated this issue with the seriousness that it deserves. And this is not just about allocating federal funding to the affected states. It's about leading from the front. If this kind of tragedy or crisis had happened in any other sensible democracy in the world, you would see the president and the federal government leading from the front, mobilizing resources, mobilizing citizens, mobilizing non-for-profit organizations, religious organizations, corporate organizations to donate, to send help to the affected states, to pull people off from this devastating outcome of the floods.
I'm so
But
sorry
we
to
have not
cut you
seen
short
that.
there,
It
Mr.
looks like these
Ayodele,
states
but
have forgotten, they've
unfortunately
been
we are out of
abandoning.
time. Thank you for your contribution, but quickly, in 30 seconds, how would you describe generally the response of the federal government to this issue of flood?
It's been very appalling, and I feel they should do better, even though, as I said, there are a lot of blames to go around. The state government too should channel the ecological fund because we're still going to, next year, there's still going to be flooding. So I think there should be a more proactiveness on all tiers of government, both the local government, the state government, and the federal government, in order to mitigate such disasters in the future.
All right, thank you very much for joining us, journalist Maiwa Olajideji. I'm so sorry. And as well, thank you for joining us, political analyst Ayodele Adio. Thank you. And that's our show for today. Join us next week for a fresh episode of the program. Remember, you can follow the conversation on our social media platforms at TVC News NG or on our website at tvcnews.tv. I am Jacinta Obiuku. Until next week, it's goodbye.